Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Lunch and Learn webinar series. Today, we're going to be talking about family homelessness. My name is Jessica Trudeau. I go by Jess, and I am the Chief Transformation Officer here at Center for Transforming Lives. In just a second, I'll have our amazing panelists introduce themselves, but I want to open and say that if you are new to the Center for Transforming Lives, we are a more than 100-year-old nonprofit organization that seeks to disrupt cycles of poverty for women and children and to build cycles of well-being. We do this through integrated programming that focuses on housing services, early child education, clinical counseling, and economic mobility. And so I want to welcome you again. We'll continue to let participants in. The stream just keeps flowing. Before I have our panelists introduce themselves, I do want to let you know that you can use the Q&A function throughout the course of the webinar or put comments in chat. I'll be sure to monitor those as we're moving through the presentation so that we can get your questions answered. We will have a Q&A at the end of the call as well if you have questions towards the end. But before we get started, I believe we have one polling question that we wanted to ask. So Dorcas, you can go ahead and cue the question. And so if everyone who's joined, if you can just take a minute and answer the question that you're seeing. About 67, 70% have participated. We'll give another few seconds. So much for getting those answers in. So the question was, what do you think is the most common cause of homelessness? And we have leading lack of affordable housing. We know that is certainly an issue in our community, and then families living in poverty, followed by a lack of available and affordable childcare. So thank you for answering that question. We're also going to end with a question right before the call to action. But right now, ladies, I would love if you introduce yourselves, if you can share your role with either TCHC, the Homeless Coalition, or with Center for Transforming Lives. And if you can also share what draws you into this work. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to be with you today. I'm Carol Klocek. I'm the Chief Executive Officer for Center for Transforming Lives. And what draws me into this work is just a growing up experience of living in a home that experienced poverty and trauma, and several siblings having experienced some form of homelessness as a result of our upbringing. And so I have a lot of personal passion with this.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lauren King. I'm the Executive Director for Tarrant County Homeless Coalition. We are a nonprofit, and our mission is to be a catalyst for community transformation. So we work with about 40 different partner agencies, all of whom are addressing homelessness in some form or fashion, and serving people experiencing homelessness on a daily basis. So we work with all of them to help move us forward. As a community, our shared vision is a vibrant community where everyone has a place to call home. What draws me to this work is that I love this community. I actually grew up here, and actually, I don't know about have the opposite experience, but what draws me to social work and to helping in general is that I have had a very fortunate life. And so I never worried about, would I have food to eat? Would the electricity be on? Would I have shoes for school? Or any of the things. Had lots and lots of opportunity afforded to me. And I truly believe that every child in our community should have those same opportunities. So I work to make our community a better place and know that we can do that.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tamara Sapp, and I am the Residential Services Program Manager at Center for Transforming Lives. What draws me to this work is similar to Carol. I had a upbringing that was not the best. However, I had a support system. I had a grandmother and family that helped me, and they were able to pick up the slack of what my parents could not provide. And so I just love being that support system to all of our families that we serve at the Center for Transforming Lives.
Thank you so much. Carol, I'm going to direct, for the audience, I have several pre-prepared questions. We certainly will take questions from you, as I mentioned, but Carol, I'm going to start with you. And so you've dedicated your career to disrupting cycles of poverty and homelessness, in particular for families. I'm wondering if you can share why you believe we've seen over this last year a 27% increase in family homelessness, and what are the most effective solutions that we are implementing either here at CTL or throughout the community, and what do you think there is an opportunity to do in terms of implementing new strategies?
Sure. So, wow, that's a big question, and I'm really excited to be able to be in this group where I think there's going to be some great and deep responses to this line of thought. But I think first I would like to make the point that most family homelessness, using the term homeless as a kind of a lay person would use it, most family homelessness is invisible. So families are living with others, extended family members, or friends or strangers that they've met, or families are living in motels and in their cars. And for every family that enters the homeless services system, we would estimate that there are at least 3 homeless families that are not in the system. But as we see it, the significant increase that we've seen in family homelessness and families specifically entering the homeless services system is due to the simultaneous end of the pandemic relief dollars. And then what we all saw post-pandemic was a big spike in housing and rent costs. And then we all saw the huge inflationary pressures on basic cost of living, especially food, but also transportation. So low-income families just couldn't keep up, even if the head of the household is working full-time. We've also seen an increase in the hurdles for families who are trying to rent in terms of security deposit increases, sometimes requiring 2 and 3 months of rent upfront, or other upfront fees that are being added. And in some cases, the security deposits have become unrefundable. So that deposit that people used to count on to pay for that next place just isn't there. So we've seen a huge amount of pressures on families, and they're just really struggling with trying to pay rent, and more of the dollars have gone to rent, which means in a time of crisis they just can't make it and they're out. For families that are living in poverty, the most effective solutions are, we'll talk about affordable housing certainly, and the lack of affordable housing, but in terms of solutions to family homelessness is preventing eviction or quickly rehousing families once they have been evicted. Texas is a very landlord-friendly state, and we know that in some cases, families are being pushed out really fast. Eviction Lab has done some great work on this and who gets evicted, and we know that having a child puts a family at higher risk for eviction. And we at Center for Transforming Lives are particularly mindful of the impact that eviction has on a child, both their emotional well-being as well as their physical health. So anything that we can do as a community to offer more short-term crisis-related rent assistance or other financial assistance to get families into housing is beneficial. And then offering legal support to families that are facing eviction. We know that just having someone in the courtroom representing a family significantly decreases the likelihood that the eviction will proceed. And then an increase in childcare subsidies. So we've seen an increase in the last couple of years in the overall number of subsidized childcare seats, but not in relation to families that are living under 200% of the federal poverty level. So, so right now there's only 1 seat for every 4 children that are eligible. So we need that basic assistance. And then the last thing I would say is programming that helps people to know their rights as tenants. We offer a monthly tenant rights workshop, and that helps, but just in the moment, people really need to know what their rights are so that they can prevent an eviction if at all possible.
Thank you so much. So encouraging. I know when I'm talking to friends that may not work in this field, it feels like a very hopeless problem. Like, you know, what can we do as regular community members? And so pointing to all of those evidence-based strategies, I think, I know for me, and when I'm having conversations in the community, it's very encouraging that as a community, we can come together and stem this. So Lauren, over to you. So you lead the Homeless Coalition, which is looking at our full continuum of care, both in terms of funding for services and direct services, but also in influencing local, state, and federal policy. So I'm wondering if you can share particular policy levers that you're paying attention to right now in supporting that you believe could be impactful in shifting this trajectory.
Sure. You're right. Yes, we do work across all programs and all types. I'm with Carol that we have often said that the most impactful way you can address homelessness is by preventing it in the first place. You want to look at efficiency and even economics as far as how much it costs to keep someone housed versus rehouse them once they lose their housing. So something for us to consider as a community. As far as policy levers, you're right. We're looking at local, state, and national policies that all impact our issue. Of course, at the federal level, always advocating for more resources. So there's a lot to be said for the fact that our community is the fastest growing community in the US, or is one of the fastest growing. And we haven't had really a reallocation of resources to match that growth. So we're still working with resources that we had when our population was not as large as it is now. And so advocating for additional resources. I'll also say addressing, Carol, you were talking about family homelessness and how that's invisible. With HUD funding specifically, there's a lot of talk about that funding is specifically for people who are on the street and in shelter. However, the federal government has actually made investments in housing in different areas. The VA is a great example where we've seen a huge decrease in veterans experiencing homelessness. So having some different conversations with the Department of Education around if we want to impact student outcomes, you know, other federal departments have been successful in reducing homelessness by investing in housing. And so what would that partnership look like for the Department of Education to really impact student homelessness and understand how that impacts their learning and educational outcomes further down? So it's kind of on a federal level, a few discussions that we're having, and I'll drop down to local. Locally, honestly, we're mostly focused on affordable housing and knowing helping people understand what that is. I think there's always I don't want those people here, but those people are the people who care for our children. They're the people who help bag your groceries, your favorite barista at Starbucks who fixes your drink and knows you by name. all of those people who help make your day go need affordable housing, and they need someplace to live. So as a city, as we grow and as we want to be somewhere where people want to come, we also have to remember that people who make our city run and who make our lives comfortable also need affordable housing. So we're advocating for a few things. One big thing is that Fort Worth is considering a bond in 2026, and we would love to see housing included in that bond. And we need a really significant investment to actually build physical units where people can live. And so we're advocating that housing be included in the bond. The other two are really how can we make it easier for partners to build housing? So we do need more rental assistance and more assistance in general. However, we are going to also have to build. So where are people going to live? So as we look at, a business brought 1,000 jobs, where are we asking ourselves, are there 1,000 additional housing units, and how are we going to produce those? And so we're really seeing that as people move here, growth is a good thing. But we're seeing that people who have lived here for a long time are essentially getting pushed out of the bottom. And so really having that conversation about what homelessness looks like, who is homeless, and the fact that in reality for our community, honestly, it's a math problem. You mentioned that the numbers just don't add up for people. So, and I will say we really turned a corner during the pandemic. Carol talked about this a little bit where, I think Fort Worth and Tarrant County was a pretty affordable place to live, historically has been. And during and after the pandemic, we really turned a corner, and rents have increased cumulatively by about 35% since 2018, and wages have not. So the idea that a family could just work harder, especially when you add in increased childcare cost, increased transportation cost, increased everything else, something has to give, and often the last thing that gives is that housing. So those are some policy changes that we're working on from the federal level to the local level.
Thank you so much, Lauren. We know that policy is where we get to population level impact, and I know we're so grateful to be a part of the Homeless Coalition, but I'm so also grateful for our community that we have you in leadership addressing these policy issues. And so, Tamara, the next question is for you. You work day in and day out witnessing the stories of women. I feel like every Lunch and Learn, we reference the impossible choices that our moms are having to make sure that their families are taken care of. But you bear witness to these stories, and I was wondering if you could talk us through trends that you're seeing, and that could be trends in terms of the obstacles and the challenges that women are facing, but also the resilience that you see and how they're drawing strength in order to show up and deal with these issues that they're facing.
Sure. So a lot of our families come in and they do not have, like Lauren and Carol shared, childcare. Childcare is a major barrier for our families. And so all of our families want to work. All of our families want to provide for their children. All of our families want a place to live. However, they cannot do those things without childcare. We work hard with them to find resources, but right now those resources are small. I know Carol talked about the childcare where it's at now, and right now we're actually on a hold to be able to even apply for CCMS for our families, and that makes it very, very, very difficult for our moms. However, they still go out every day. They still go and job search every day. A lot of our parents are taking, they have 2 and 3 children. They're getting on the bus. They get on the bus, an hour to 2 hours early. Then they're, taking their children with them, applying for applications. And that stuff can be so much more easier if they were able to put their children in childcare and be able to, do the things that they need to do to be able to go to work. Another thing would be the income. So right now, minimum wage is $7.25, right? And so $7.25 is impossible to live on. That's just the reality. And so they're making $7.25 an hour. They got childcare and they're making $7.25, but we still can't get an apartment for them because they need to make 3 times the rent. And so that is another big trend and another big obstacles that we face, along with the trauma that these ladies go through. So, you know, when we think about trauma, we think about domestic abuse, or we think about, you know, that neglect or what have you. Although those are trauma, but being homeless in itself is a trauma that these women face. And so when you don't think about homelessness as being a trauma. And so when they have to endure, you know, I don't have a place to sleep. I don't have a job. I don't have nowhere to place my child for childcare. You know, what am I going to do? And so that's what a lot of our families go through. They sit and they think and they think, and then they don't see a way out of those situations. And so I think it's really difficult when we're faced against those different obstacles for our families. And you know, as our case management team, they work really hard to find the resources for our families, but it's just hard right now because it's not available. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, please go ahead.
No, I'm good. I'm done. Sorry.
Just in case. No, I was just looking at our attendees, and I know that, you know, we have more than 70 participants on the call representing different sectors of work. And I know that many of, in particular, our nonprofit providers share that challenge of how to walk alongside participants who have experienced so much trauma. And then for you as program manager and for our leaders at the organization to make sure that our staff are taken care of as we're walking through that. So I really appreciate you sharing that. I just posted a note. If you have any questions, please put them into the chat or use the QA function. But I'll continue with the questions that we had prepared prior to this call. Carol, Lauren talked about policy reform, and you know, we also, on behalf of our organization, seek to influence local, state, and federal policy. So are there any policy strategies at any of those levels that have come to your mind as we were hearing from Lauren?
I would just underscore everything that Lauren said. You know, we the most effective long-term sustainable solution is affordable housing, and we need to build intentionally affordable housing. We need to build it in areas where it is smart to build. You know, we at Center for Transforming Lives, we have a new project, a new campus that's going in Southeast Fort Worth. That's an area that needs additional resources that could really benefit from an investment of affordable housing to really improve the quality of life for families there. But that's not necessarily where jobs are located. So, so looking at the investment of affordable housing also in combination with strategies that make sure that people get to where the jobs are. And then, as Tamara underscored, the need for affordable childcare. So that kind of simultaneous investment in housing, transportation, and childcare is what low-income families need. You know, when we talk about low-income families, there's all kinds of assumptions that people come to mind when people hear that term. They sort of hear low income means not working, and that is just not the case. You know, it is the case that these families are working, their income is low. So they, even if they're not in a $7.25 an hour job, it might be in a $10 an hour job or a $12 an hour job. But again, that's not enough to for safe, stable, consistent housing. So we need to change that, and we need to be focused on all the different ways that we can develop workforce housing. so in addition to that, I would say, looking at those rent protections at a state level, opportunity to cure is one of the things that we pushed in the last legislative session, and that just simply means that allowing a tenant to pay in full with their rent payments, their late fees by that date of eviction means they get to stay in the home, and that just makes sense. Right now in Texas, if you're fully paid by that date of eviction, you can still be evicted. So that we'd love to see that opportunity to cure be in place. We would also like to see it be the case that if you have an eviction filed against you, but that eviction doesn't proceed, that doesn't stay on your record. Because unfortunately, right now, if that eviction filing is on your record, then landlords see that and may not allow your application for the apartment to proceed. So it prevents, it's just another barrier, or a landlord will increase the fees that are upfront, which then keeps people from being in housing. And then longer opportunities to pay rent and fees so that families can catch up. We also are really interested in any kind of joint policy or programming that would support families that are involved in child protective services. More than 75% of the cases of abuse and neglect in Tarrant County and really nationwide are for neglectful supervision, and so we know that that living in poverty, that unstable housing keeps families either from being in the same home together, or keeps families from, so they can't be reunited, or it leads to conditions that are a neglectful supervision. So we have too many kids that are already in that system, and the homeless families tend to be referred to Child Protective Services more often. So we'd like to see some joint programming at the state level. And then, at the federal level, the Homeless Children and Youth Act is one that we would support, because having those different definitions in the Department of Education and then the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development just doesn't work for children, and so we would like to see just some smarter, some comprehensive function there in support of families overall.
Thank you so much, Carol. We have several questions that have come in, and I am marking them as complete as you are answering them. So there was one on the Child Protective Services system that you have already responded to. I'll read out these questions, and then whoever would like to take them. The first question comes from an MSW student that is highlighting that her understanding that families are living paycheck to paycheck. And so I was wondering if someone could talk about, the issue of having no fixed or liquid assets in the case of an emergency, which, we see all the time for the families that we're serving.
Carol, you want to go first?
Go right ahead, Lauren.
Well, I was just going to say, I would say consider this even outside of when we're talking about homelessness. I mean, I think if you look at, there's so many studies done about the fact that the majority of Americans don't have $500 if there was an emergency. So I guess take that slant on it, as far as that is not just a lack of assets is not just a homeless, a family's experiencing homelessness issue or a low-income families issue. That's an issue overall. And I will say it doesn't allow you to have any kind of safety net, as you mentioned. So that's what I would say about that. I would say having a lack of assets is not just a low-income issue. It's kind of an overall economic, if you look at how our economy runs, issue, and what assets do people have access to? Carol, I don't know if you have anything else. I was gonna, if you don't, I'm gonna jump on to a couple of things that you say, if that's okay.
I just, there are, I mean, there are, when we look at the asset poverty profile in Tarrant County, it has certainly worsened. And so families don't have liquid savings. They're often unbanked or underbanked. And so, you know, Center for Transforming Lives offers financial coaching to help people reach those financial goals. We started within the last couple of years providing small business development, and that is primarily for people so that they can develop a side hustle. And you know, so in addition to one job or two jobs that they're working, they've also got this other way of bringing in money, and a lot of times that is just so that they can develop a cushion. So it's alarming the amount of need, and we, you know, I think organizations are working to be creative to help families build those financial cushions, but there's a lot of pressures.
We have several more questions, but I do want to thank Elaine for your comments. I am referencing women and children because for the Center for Transforming Lives, our mission is targeted towards women and children, but absolutely families with both dad and mom experience poverty, experience homelessness. And so I want to acknowledge and really say thank you for dropping that comment in. And then also your comment regarding net pay versus gross pay. So again, just want to say thank you for those comments. I'm going to go back to the question at the top of the Q&A. And so, Lauren, I'm going to direct this question to you. If I have a client who has been experiencing homelessness, where would you say is the best place to start looking for housing assistance and affordable housing throughout Tarrant County?
So probably the best place to start is actually to text our helpline. And we have a homeless helpline, and our helpline coordinator can actually speak to whoever that is, help assess and kind of see what the situation is. And then we have a lot of different resources depending on what the situation is. So I think sometimes people may think that if you experience homelessness, to get housed, you essentially have to go to a shelter and wait. You have to get on a wait list. Everybody knows the housing wait list. That is not actually how our system works anymore. I mean, we do still need more resources to provide housing for everyone. However, for example, if we had someone, if someone's experiencing homelessness and they can actually maintain, so they've lost their housing, but if we were able to just get them into a new place to live, then they could maintain that afterwards with their income. We can pay the first few months rent, deposit, to help them get back in, and then they're off and running and going again. So, and part of that's looking at, you know, we realized a few years ago that we had people who were working and staying in shelters so they could save up to get back into housing. So it's costing, you know, let's call it $5,000 that it costs to get back into a place to live after you've lost a place, especially if you've experienced eviction. And so, you know, even if you're making $15 an hour, which is not the housing wage, but even if you're making $15 an hour, it is going to take you a long time to save that up. And so removing that barrier. So by texting our helpline, we also have a form on our website. I will say, honestly, we get a huge number of calls. We're trying to figure out kind of the best way to not mitigate that, but help respond faster and better to that. So texting and email or filling out our form online is probably the fastest way to get a response and get things going there. But that's where I would start, and then can kind of be directed into what resource is the best fit for your client.
Thank you so much, Lauren. We have more questions coming in, so I'm going to move to the next question. And anyone who would like to answer, are there any plans in the works to increase the number of rent vouchers available to subsidize the cost of housing and to streamline or expedite the process that nonprofit builders of permanent supportive housing have to go through to get additional housing built? And I would just add to this that we know that we have a very high rate of voucher refusal in our community. So I think that's probably part of the answer. Whoever would like to take that one.
Steve, I see your question. Okay, so as far as voucher, getting additional vouchers. That's one of the things at the federal level. Even, you know, a lot of times when we're talking about project-based vouchers specifically, we're talking about our local housing authorities. And they're actually the ones who see the biggest impact of that kind of a population leveling not happening. So our housing authorities are still working with the same number of vouchers they had like back in the early 2000s. And so considering the amount of our population growth, we really need to see a change there. That would be very, very impactful. There are lots of other discussions going on too about how could we create private voucher funds, like how do we, if we can't get this from the federal government, then as a community, how are we going to do this? So is there an investment tool or something where we could still generate the same type of rental assistance for people, just not necessarily relying on the feds for that? The second part of that policy question about expediting, I will say when we talked about local policy, I talked briefly about the bond. The other two policies that we're a group of housing developers are working on would be actually to do that, to be able to expedite the process and also to waive fees. So right now we're doing a lot of robbing Peter to pay Paul with fees. And so developments cost more because they have to put all these fees in place that come right back to the city, which affordable housing helps. And so doing some advocacy and work around that policy change to say, okay, affordable housing developers are literally doing everything they can. The city's going to have to step in with some policy and funding to impact that.
Thank you so much. There was one question as we continue to work through questions. There was one question about becoming involved with lobbying or advocacy activities. And so into the QA, I dropped in an email address for Michael Devlin, who is with Housing First, who leads a coalition that meets every other Friday at 9 a.m. You can reach out to him, even if it's just to receive email updates on that group's activity. So the next question is, are there any public-private partnerships around affordable housing that any of the leaders are excited about? If yes, how can the public help?
Okay, you want me to start with this one? Okay, so public-private partnerships, our community loves public-private partnerships. And actually, I think they've worked very, very well for us. I actually often get the question, not often, but sometimes we'll get the question about, you know, should the city buy housing? Should the county buy housing? My answer is generally no. They should provide funding for this and avenues to make this happen easier. And then let nonprofits and developers do what we're good at. So I'm very accountable to my board. Carol is very accountable to her board. Let us do that and let us be part of the public good with that. As far as public-private, yes. So the Homeless Coalition, back when the ARPA Act passed, so American Rescue Plan Act passed through Congress, our community got quite a bit of money dropped in their lap, which was great. And so one of the things that the Homeless Coalition advocated for was capital to build. And asked for 90 million, we got about 55 million. And so right now, actually, that is public funding. However, private entities are putting all of that to work. And also, we've had a number of philanthropic groups step in and say, hey, we have this much public money. We want to come in and match it and do that public-private there. But it's really interesting to watch how affordable housing evolves. We have a number of like really complicated deals that how they finance that and how they make that work is a huge mix of public and private dollars and a lot of different vehicles. So whether it be tax credits, home funding, whatever that might look like, we try to throw it all in the pot and see what we can make work, essentially is what happens. So I do think that leaders are excited though, just about kind of the traction that this is getting, really coming to grips with the fact that affordable housing is very needed. And we do have a group that's very committed to making that happen and who's mission driven and who wants to make those things happen.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for your engagement. I just responded to a couple of questions in the QA, but I'm going to continue so that we can get through these. So we have Cynthia that says that recently she has been receiving referrals for families that have been chronically underemployed and are now facing homelessness. They need long-term case management, but her program does not provide that. Tamara, I'm wondering if you want to talk about our transitional housing and rapid rehousing program, and then Carol and Lauren, please jump in with what resources you would recommend.
Absolutely. So our transitional housing program serves families that are working individuals. They've been working for a very long time, and they need the case management and the counseling services. And we are able to provide those services. That program is a 12 to 18 month program. And we walk alongside each one of our families. And we're able to provide rental assistance and utility assistance while the families are still working, and we encourage them to save. That goes along with what we were talking about earlier about a family being able to save that $500 amount to be able to help them. And so we push savings a lot. We connect them to counseling services, and we connect them to our economic mobility program as well. And so they get a wraparound service, and we are able to provide that for our families. Our rapid rehousing program does, however, go through our coordinated entry process. And so they would have to start there first and be referred to Center for Transforming Lives. We do have space available, but like I said, it's a referral based only. So Lauren's team handles that, and they do a very great job with making sure that we get the families, and we're able to provide the case management and rental help for those families.
Thank you, Tamara. I want to say, Elaine, I want to have coffee with you. Please reach out to me. But Elaine has just dropped another very important comment into the QA about the importance of elected officials knowing the number. One of the questions I answered was the number of children in Tarrant County that we believe are homeless. And so there's more than 5,000 that have been reported most recently through TEA that are in school, but we know 50% of children who are homeless are under the age of 5. So well more than 10,000. We absolutely do seek CTL and then also Lauren and the Homeless Coalition to make sure that our elected officials are educated on this. I saw that in attendance with us is our consultant for governmental affairs. And so Carol, and I were in Austin last legislative session for Tarrant County Days, making sure that elected officials know the realities of what's happening here in Tarrant County. And then we're also doing that with local elected officials. But Carol or Lauren, I don't know if you have any further comments on that.
So I agree that it's key, and also that it's key to get people outside of the group that can. Oh, can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I had an echo for a second. Outside of just kind of, I hate to say it, but the same people beating the drum over and over and over, and right. And so like, that's why we need people who are on this call, our boards, different involved people who care about the issues. And part of it, I think, is really helping people understand how they can go to action. One thing we often say with council, especially, is that the no's always show up. We have to have the yeses show up. And so if there are people in our community who care deeply about these issues and who want to see things changed, elected officials have to also see that. So, yeah, working on building that consensus and really changing, also, like Elaine mentioned, really changing the idea of who is experiencing homelessness, and really making sure that people understand that who's experiencing homelessness, who needs affordable housing, is not always the stereotype, is typically not actually the stereotype that comes to mind for people. And so, you know, how do we really help people, elected officials and the general public, understand that, you know, they don't necessarily understand who this is, and how do we help them get there?
Bless you, Carol. Did you have something to add?
No, I think, just underscoring the importance of involving caring people in the community, because, Lauren and I both been in this conversation for a really long time, and in some days it just doesn't feel like we're closer to resolving, and in fact it feels like we're farther away. So getting the word out, just really making sure that people understand that those who experience homelessness, the vast majority, that's not where they want to be. They're not making that as a life choice. They're trying desperately to get out of it, but it can be extremely difficult to do that. And the more we understand and relate to the humanity of people experiencing homelessness, the quicker we will resolve the challenges we face.
To respond to one question and ask for feedback, and then in the meantime, Dorcas, if you want to cue the poll right before our call to action. And so the question is, what is available for people with mental health issues who need more day-to-day support and assistance in order to remain housed? And I'll say that at CTL, every single housing participant is offered to go through our clinical counseling program, and we absolutely see the need for mental health support and trauma treatment. But if anyone would like to add anything while Dorcas pulls up that poll.
I would say, before I ask Lauren to speak specifically to some of the programs that MHMR might be doing, I mean, the women that we work with, almost all of them have experienced significant amounts of trauma. There's so much difficulty just going through that reality of poverty and homelessness that leads to depression and anxiety. So when we're thinking about mental health, we need to be including that group, and not just those that are experiencing some form of psychosis or severe substance use. So we need to have different strategies for those two groups, and I think sometimes it's important to think about them separately. But Lauren, I know you've worked really closely with providers, and people are doing some creative, great work out there.
So we're working on a couple of things that I can briefly touch on. One is actually with the, we received a grant from one of the Bezos foundations, specifically to serve families. And one of our goals with that is to actually be able to layer on top additional services. So understanding that people need to be able to have lower caseloads. So, perhaps 25 to 1, they're not going to be able to meet all 25. They're going to try their hardest to meet as many needs as they can, but really looking at, if you have a higher needs family, how do I help them recover in all the different areas? Is it enough that we've said, like, here you're in housing, great, off you go? How can we help them recover in other areas as well? So we're doing some things like that, and that'll be a pilot to really see what are the different results there, how does that impact families, and then moving forward, if we see successful results, which I think we will, how do we continue to implement this in our community? So that's one thing we're very committed to, is doing we're data driven. And so, if it works well, then let's do it. I would say for others, we are working on a couple things. One thing that I think will be announced on Tuesday at council work session, but working on putting some more intensive behavioral health teams together to help people stay housed and also create relationships to get people housed as well. So we know that this is an issue, and so we're trying hard to figure, like Carol said, out what are some different ways that we can do this, and what resources is it going to take.
Excellent. I do want to say that on a scale of 1 to 10, I give this audience a 15 for participation. So thank you so much, everyone. On the note of participation, Dorcas put up a poll. If you would take a minute to provide your answer. But in the meantime, we want to start to wrap up, and we want to hear from you. What is the call to action? So that's come up a couple of times in the questions. What can, no matter what discipline the individual is representing, what can they do to be a part of shifting this trajectory?
I can start by saying, if you're someone who is new to the understanding of homelessness, do what you can to educate yourself on the factors that lead to homelessness and who is doing what. I think, I love to see passion that people have when they first really become aware, but then they often feel like they've got to start something new. And I would say find out all of the great things that are happening already, and the remarkable history of effectiveness that organizations have, and get involved with one of those, and then use that opportunity to learn more and decide a direction to go. I would say too, if you are involved or interested in policy work, either make your opinions known to your elected officials on affordable housing and the things we've talked about today, so that there are protections for folks and the affordable housing that we need in our community, or get involved with your favorite nonprofit. Each of us, whether it's the Homeless Coalition or Center for Transforming Lives or the Presbyterian Night Shelter, none of us get the funds that we need from government grants and resources to support that work that we do. So it's all public-private partnerships, and so we need your support. And help us spread the word. We so appreciate you being with us today, and would love to have you get involved or get even more involved than you already are.
That's great, Carol. I'll echo what you said, everything that Carol said. We always encourage people to get involved with our partners. They absolutely rely on the community's financial donations, your in-kind donations, volunteer hours. They very, very much need those. Often when people will come and say, I want to start something new, I also encourage people to understand what is already happening and how they can get involved there, because there's a lot of good work happening in our community that we, can always use more people power on. From a policy side, I agree. I would also let your, whether it be your congressional representative, your state rep, or your local city council or county commissioner know what you care about. If we're doing a specific policy change, then I try to keep our leaders updated so they can let you know. But again, like I said, if you care about the issue, we need the yeses to show up, because often the no's do. And so anytime the yeses can show up and, let elected officials know that people do care about various issues, and it does impact our community welfare overall, it's really, really important. So, and I would say just learn. So thanks for being here. Understand what homelessness is. So if your neighbor says, all those people are just panhandlers, that's not necessarily true. And now you have information today that we've shared that hopefully you can give a better picture of who does experience homelessness and who needs affordable housing in our community.
I'm on mute button. I definitely agree with everything these welling knowledge people have shared with us today. For me, I get to see it firsthand. I'm here on the floors when volunteers come in and help the families, and when the donations come in and things of that nature. So my big ask would be to get involved in any way possible. The smallest involvement is actually a very big involvement to us. And so I definitely would agree that being involved, being knowledgeable about what services are available. We get many calls from people and they want to know, how can I help this person? And so getting knowledgeable about what services are provided is a big way that you can help. And we'll all work together to do our best.
I'm so grateful to work with all of you. Thank you so much. I think this could have been 3 hours possibly. But we got to so much important content for the audience. This is part of a webinar series. This year we are offering these every other month. Our next webinar session will be held in conjunction with the Child Poverty Action Lab over in Dallas, and it is April 5th at noon. Be on the lookout for registration. We will send this recording out later today. And then if you want to join later in the year, future webinars will feature local and national leaders talking about economic mobility. We're going to have one session on early child brain development. And then later in the year, we will be sharing out updates to our white paper, the landscape for women and children throughout Tarrant County, and then our own learnings throughout this year. So thank you so much again for being with us. We hope you have a wonderful day.
Thanks all.